Every truth hides a darker secret.
Night is always more honest than day. In darkness, a single footstep weighs more than a word. Headlights are not just light, they are a thin needle, stitching you into the road. And somewhere at the end of that needle is the empty space where people disappear. We like to think evil has a face, a photo in a police file, a name, a few crumbs of biography later pieced together in documentaries. But there is another kind of evil, faceless. When the crimes are real, the victims are real, the pain is real, but the one who caused it dissolves. Uncaught, unidentified, unnamed, a vanished killer. Tonight, 3 stories. 3 different places, 3 different decades. But the same feeling. An invisible shadow passing by, and leaving no shadow on the ground. We're not here for sensationalism. We're here to look into the void, to learn how to see shape where there seems to be nothing. The first story, Zodiac. Northern California, late 1960s. Letters to newspapers. Ciphers. Symbols. Phone calls to police. And murders that always carried a trace of theater. This was a killer who spoke to the city. He wanted recognition. He wanted to be feared correctly. Not as a man, but as an idea. And the most terrifying thing about an idea is that it doesn't need an address or a name. The second, the monster of Florence. Tuscany, the 1970s and 80s. Lovers' lanes, gunshots, moonlight, olive groves. And a silence louder than a scream. An investigation lasting decades. Hundreds of files. Lives warped by suspicion. At times it feels as though the city itself is alive and refuses to give up its secret. The third, the Highway of Tears. Northern British Columbia, Canada. Hundreds of kilometers of asphalt. Forests, swamps, stretches of nowhere. And decades of disappearances. Mostly young women, many of them indigenous. Here, there isn't one face or one name. There is only the pattern of an unsafe world that hates to be seen too clearly. And yet, we will look. This is not horror for its own sake. This is a record of a species trying to understand how the invisible becomes possible. Why the killer sometimes vanishes more perfectly than the victim. Why some cases are like black holes. The closer you get, the less light remains. We'll be careful with the details. Not to soften the truth, but to keep pain from turning into spectacle. Our task is to find the pattern, to hear consequence where no sound remains, and to say honestly where facts end and conjecture begins. Picture a map of the night. On it, 3 points. San Francisco, and the quiet bay reflecting lights and ciphers. Florence, and its dark hills, where olive trees remember footsteps better than people do. And the long Canadian highway, where headlights pass like rare comets. And between them, kilometers of silence. 3 lines begin now. And each leads to the same destination. A single question no one has ever answered. How do people disappear when thousands of eyes are searching? We begin in California. A place that believes in reason. With letters that look like games. And a man who chose a symbol. A circle crossed by lines. To turn himself from a figure into a phenomenon. This is the story of a killer who spoke to the world. And the world replied with silence. A story where evidence becomes language. Where a clue is a text. And a cipher, a form of power. Zodiac. The chapter begins. Northern California, late 1960s. Nighttime parking lots on the outskirts. FM radio humming through car speakers. A kind of light-hearted recklessness. Until a predator begins speaking to the city in text. He kills, and he writes. he sends ciphers, and he calls the police. He doesn't just want to be feared. He wants to be quoted. The factual skeleton of the case looks like this. Investigators confirm 4 attacks and 5 murders, with 2 survivors. December 20, 1968, Betty Lou Jensen, 16, and David Faraday, 17, shot dead on Lake Herman Road near Benicia. July 4 to 5, 1969, Blue Rock Springs, Vallejo, Darlene Ferrin, 22, killed, Michael Mago, 19, survives. The shooter returns for a second volley, then calls the police himself. September 27, 1969, Lake Berryessa, Brian Hartnell, 20, and Cecilia Shepard, 22, tied up and stabbed. Hartnell survives, Cecilia dies 2 days later. On the door of their car, the killer writes the dates of previous attacks, and his mark, a circle with a cross. October 11, 1969, San Francisco, Presidio Heights, taxi driver Paul Stein, 29, shot in the head. The killer wipes the blood, cuts off a piece of the victim's shirt as a trophy, and later mails it to a newspaper. From that moment on, the city begins to live with letters. The first arrive at the San Francisco Chronicle and other papers in July 1969. Accompanied by the Z for 08 cipher, 408 characters of symbols. It reads, "I like killing people because it's so much fun." Decrypted by a schoolteacher and his wife. The second major cipher, Z340, remained unsolved for 51 years. Until a team of international code breakers cracked it in 2020. Its content? More bravado. Denials of identity. Nothing about his real name. Here's what matters: the Zodiac controlled attention. He dictated the rhythm. Let a publication panic new murder or threat. He proved authenticity through details from police files. Sent the fragment of Stein's bloody shirt. The press and police, hoping to expose him, couldn't stop replying. And that was his real power over the city. His timeline and his style evolved. At Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs, execution at close range. At Lake Berryessa, theater. A black hood with the crosshair emblem sewn onto it. A daytime attack. Conversation with victims. The writing on the car door, a signature. In San Francisco, a cab, a single shot, a trophy, and a clean escape. Through the Presidio, right past a military base. Different tactics. Same communication pattern. Codes, threats, phone calls. The most famous suspect, Arthur Lee Allen. Plenty of coincidences, behavior, weapons, timing. But DNA and handwriting never matched. Over the decades, new names surfaced. Most already dead. Officially, the case remains open. No final match. No face. Why does it still grip us by the throat? Because this was not just a crime. It was a text. Here, the weapon wasn't only the gun, it was language. Letters, riddles, ciphers. The city became a co-author. By publishing his words, we helped create the Zodiac. A virus that lived inside the headlines. And then, silence. He vanished, leaving half-truths behind. And the echo of a voice. On the answering machine of an entire era. Italy. Tuscany. 1968 to 1985. A series of murders targeting couples who sought privacy in parked cars. The killer's method was clinical, shots fired from a .22 Beretta, Model 70 H series. Followed by knife wounds and post-mortem mutilation. What made it terrifying was the repetition. The same weapon, the same ballistic marks. The same ritual precision. Where the trail begins. Retrospectively, investigators linked the series to a double murder on August 21, 1968, in Senior. Barbara Locke and her lover Antonio Lo Bianco were shot in their car. In the back seat, Barbara's 6-year-old son Natalino was sleeping. He survived. At the time, Barbara's husband, Stefano Mele, was convicted. But later, new killings occurred with the same gun, while Mele was still in prison. That discovery gave rise to the Sardinian Trail, Pista Sarda, a web of family ties, jealousy, and the idea of a shared pistol. It was never proven. The peaks of the timeline. After 1968, the series woke up again in 1974, and then continued to strike across Florence and its outskirts. 1981, 1982, 1983, 1984, 1985. New couples, the same .22 cartridges, the same signature on the bodies. At times, the killer took body fragments as trophies. One such fragment, part of a woman's breast, was mailed to a female investigator. A dialogue through horror. The crime scenes, rural roads and secluded parking spots around San Casciano and the hills northeast of Florence. The geography itself became part of the story. The olive groves, the night air, the silence thicker than blood. The figure of Pietro Pacciani. In the early 1990s, police focused on Pietro Pacciani, a local farmer with a violent past, domestic abuse, and intimate knowledge of the terrain. He was convicted, then acquitted on appeal. And a retrial was ordered, but Pacciani died before it began. Attention shifted to his alleged accomplices, Mario Vanni and Giancarlo Lotti, who were convicted in 2000. Yet the Beretta was never found, and no one could prove that the monster was truly this group. That void bred new versions. Rumors of sects, clients, doctors, even Masonic lodges. Fueled by the ritual nature of the mutilations, the case sank into a fog of conspiracy. A new trace, DNA. In 2024, Italian media reported fresh DNA evidence found on objects tied to the murders. It could, theoretically, narrow the circle. But even now, there is no official name. Some criminologists doubt the single killer theory altogether, suggesting a core perpetrator, surrounded by imitators. Why does it hold us? Because unlike cinematic psychopaths, this story is a catalogue of human error. Press leaks, interagency rivalries, and investigators who began believing their own hypotheses. And beyond all that, the Tuscan night itself, where silence feels denser than blood. The monster is either dead or still alive, folded invisibly into the lives of ordinary people. And no theory has ever been able to stitch closed every tear in the fabric of the facts. Highway of Tears. A 719-kilometer stretch of Canada's Highway 16, between Prince George and Prince Rupert in British Columbia. Since the late 1960s, women and girls have vanished or been found murdered along this road. A disproportionate number of them Indigenous. The name Highway of Tears was born in 1998, at a vigil in the town of Terrace. A phrase meant to capture the endless grief of families still waiting. How many victims? That depends on who you ask, and what you count as connected. The RCMP's Project EPANA officially recognizes fewer than 18 cases. 1969 to 2006. But local and indigenous organizations cite 40, 60, even 80+ names, including disappearances that fall outside EPANA's narrow criteria. Type of travel, location, time frame, victim profile. Almost all remain unsolved. This is not the work of one killer. It is a pattern of vulnerability. Hitchhiking, poverty, isolation, broken communication, and a system slow to respond. The geography of risk. Large stretches of the highway cut through forests, wetlands, and vast empty intervals spanning tens of kilometers. Many young women hitchhike to reach school or work. At night, there are no witnesses. No cameras. Only headlights flickering in the dark. For decades, police faced accusations of neglect, of dismissing missing Indigenous women as runaways or lifestyle cases. Only in the 2000s did systematic attention begin. Project EPANA, Missing billboards. Emergency phones. Surveillance cameras. But the distances, they remain like an ocean. Anchor cases, a few among many. Helen Frost, 17, 1970, disappeared from Prince George after leaving home one evening. Silence ever since. Roxanne Thiara, 15, 1994, and Alicia, Leah, Jermaine, 15, 1994, both from Prince George, both found murdered. They knew each other, but no official link was ever proved. Ayla Saracolgio, 14, 2006, last seen on video in town. Her body found near an exit off Highway 16. One of the key cases under Project EPANA. Why not a single monster? Because the timeline spans decades. The MO varies. Circumstances differ. Hitchhiking, domestic violence, transient crime, isolated attacks. Police have tied certain incidents to traveling offenders. Truckers, seasonal workers. And in some cases, individual suspects emerged. But there has never been a grand answer. And that's the coldest truth. On this road, place itself becomes the predator. A long, voiceless highway, where the only law is the reach of your headlights. 3 stories. 3 countries. And each time emptiness where we expect a full stop. The Zodiac showed that evil can be a language. The killer became text, and the city, his printing press. We learn to fear not the man, but the unsigned letter. The monster of Florence became a mirror for the investigation itself. Where there is no single truth, conspiracy grows. Where no gun is found, myths of sects and elites take root. So much so that, 40 years later, we're still chasing DNA echoes in the archives. The Highway of Tears reminds us that sometimes there is no man in the shadows. There is only a system of defenselessness. Poverty, distance, indifference, bias. And when all of that aligns, the road itself begins to swallow names. We love myths about monsters because they give horror a shape. But the real terror lies in what has no face. A system's mistake. A silence in the paperwork. A single unchecked meter of forest. A kilometer of unlit road. Where there is no single culprit, it becomes harder to forgive ourselves. And yet, these stories have meaning. Not one of fear, but of memory. And of action. That names must keep being spoken. That archives are not cemeteries, but organs of memory. That the vulnerable need light and safe passage. Literally, lighting, connection, transport. And that investigators need time and funding. So that no case is ever closed with. Too much time has passed. If you resonate with this kind of exploration, subscribe. Ahead, we'll keep unraveling stories where fact is stronger than fiction. And the mysterious is not a ghost story, but a question without an answer. That's still worth asking.